Good evening, everyone. Oh, one moment, please. There we go. Good evening, everyone. Hello. Today, we are continuing with our readings of the Grimm's fairy tales. We will be starting with Little Red Riding Hood, as the title of the stream indicates. This is a very short story. So afterwards, there are a few. We'll probably read the next story or two after that as well. And that will be that for today. All right. Let us begin with our main story for tonight. Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood. There was once a sweet little maid, much beloved by everybody, but most of all by her grandmother, who never knew how to make enough of her. Once she sent a little riding hood of red velvet, and it was very becoming to her, and she never wore anything else. People called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood. Here are some cakes and a flask of wine for you to take to grandmother. She is weak and ill, and they will do her good. Make haste and start before it grows hot, and walk properly and nicely, and don't run, or you might fall and break the flask of wine, and there would be none left for grandmother. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, instead of starting about you. I will be sure to take care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand upon it. Now, the grandmother lived away in the wood, half an hour's walk from the village, and when Little Red Riding Hood had reached the wood, she met the wolf. But as she did not know what sort of bad animal he was, she did not feel frightened. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," he said. "Thank you kindly, Wolf," answered she. "Where are you going so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What are you carrying under your apron?" "Cakes and wine we baked yesterday, and my grandmother is very weak and ill, and they will do her good and strengthen her." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "Quarter of an hour's walk from here. Her house stands beneath 3 oak trees, and you may know it by the hazel bushes," said Little Red. The wolf thought to himself, "That tender young thing would be a delicious morsel, and would taste better than the old one. I must manage somehow to get both of them." Then he walked by Little Red Riding Hood a little while, and said, "Little Red Riding Hood, just look at the pretty flowers that are growing all around you. And I don't think you are listening to the song of the birds. You are posting along just as if you were going to school, and it is so delightful here in the woods." Little Red Riding Hood glanced around her, and when she saw sunbeams darting here and there through the trees, and lovely flowers everywhere, she thought to herself, "If I were to take a fresh nosegay to my grandmother, she would be very pleased. And it is so early in the day that I shall reach her in plenty of time." And so she ran about in the wood, looking for flowers. And as she picked one, she saw still a prettier one, a little further off, so she went further and further into the woods. But the wolf went straight to grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" cried the grandmother. "Little Red Riding Hood," he answered, "and I have brought you some cake and wine. Please open the door." "Lift the latch," cried the grandmother. "I am too feeble to get up." So the wolf lifted the latch, and the door flew open. and he fell upon the grandmother and ate her up without saying one word. And then he drew on her clothes, put on her cap, lay down in her bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood was, all this time, running about among the flowers. And when she had gathered as many as she could hold, she remembered her grandmother and set off to go to her. She was surprised to find the door standing open. And when she came inside, she felt very strange and thought to herself, "Oh dear, how uncomfortable I feel. And I was so glad this morning to go to my grandmother." And when she said, "Good morning," there was no answer. Then she went up to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay the grandmother with her cap pulled over her eyes, so she looked very odd. "Oh, grandmother, what large ears you have." "The better to hear you with." "Oh, grandmother, what great eyes you have." "The better to see you with." "Oh, grandmother, what large hands you have." "The better to take hold of you with." "But, grandmother, what a terrible large mouth you have." "The better to devour you." And no sooner had the wolf said it than he made one bound from the bed and swallowed up poor Little Red Riding Hood. Then the wolf, having satisfied his hunger, lay down again in the bed, and went to sleep, and began to snore loudly. The huntsman heard him as he was passing by the house, and he thought, "How the old woman snores! I had better see if there is anything the matter with her." Then he went into the room, and walked up to the bed, and saw the wolf lying there. "At last I find you, you old sinner," said he. "I have been looking for you a long time." And he made up his mind that the wolf had swallowed the grandmother whole, and yet she still might be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of shears, and began to slit up the wolf's body. When he made a few snips, Little Red Riding Hood appeared, and after a few more snips she jumped out and cried, "Oh dear! How frightened I have been! It's so dark inside the wolf." And then out came the old grandmother, still living and breathing. But Little Red Riding Hood went and quickly fetched some large stones, which he filled the wolf's body, so that when he waked up and was going to rush away, the stones were so heavy that he sank down and fell dead. They were all three very pleased. The huntsman took off the wolf's skin and carried it home. The grandmother ate the cakes and drank the wine, and held up her head again. And Little Red Riding Hood said to herself that she would never more stray about in the wood alone, but would mind what her mother told her. It must also be related how a few days afterwards, when Little Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to her grandmother, another wolf spoke to her, and wanted to tempt her to leave the path. But she was on her guard, and went straight on her way, and told her grandmother how the wolf had met her, and wished her good day, but had looked so wicked about the eyes, that she thought, if it had not been on the high road, he would have devoured her. "Come," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, so that he may not get in." Soon after came the wolf knocking at the door, calling out, "Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Riding Hood, bringing you cakes." But they remained still and did not open the door. After that, the wolf slunk by the house, and got at last upon the roof to wait until Little Red should return home in the evening. Then he meant to spring down upon her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother discovered the plot. Now there stood before the house a great stone trough, and the grandmother said to the child, "Little Red Riding Hood, I was boiling sausages yesterday, so take the bucket and carry away the water they were boiled in, and pour it into the trough." And Little Red Riding Hood did so, until the great trough was quite full. When the smell of sausages reached the nose of the wolf, he snuffed it up, and looked round, and stretched out his neck so far that he lost his balance and began to slip, and he slipped down off the roof straight into the great trough and drowned. Then Little Red Riding Hood went cheerfully home and came to no harm. And that is the story that we all know of Little Red Riding Hood. Now, that only took us about 10 minutes, so we have time for another story. The next story in the book is titled Ferdinand the Faithful and Ferdinand the Unfaithful. We'll begin that now. But allow me to have a sip of my water first. Oh, my glass is quite empty. Never mind. Let us begin the story. Ferdinand the Faithful and Ferdinand the Unfaithful. Once upon a time, there lived a man and a woman who, so long as they were rich, had no children. But when they were poor, they had a little boy. They could, however, find no godfather for him. So the man said he would just go to another place and see if he could get one there. As he went, a poor man met him, who asked him where he was going. He said that he was going to see if he could get a godfather, that he was poor, and so no one would stand as godfather for him. "Oh," said the poor man, "well, thou art poor, and I am poor. I will be godfather for thee, but I am so ill off that I can give the child nothing. Go home and tell the nurse that she is to come to the church with the child." When they all got to the church together, the beggar was already there, and he gave the child the name of Ferdinand the Faithful. When he was going out of the church, the beggar said, "Now go home. I can give thee nothing, and thou likewise ought to give me nothing." But he gave a key to the nurse, and told her, when she got home, that she was to give it to the father, who was to take care of it until the child was 14 years old. And then he was to go to the hearth. And then he was to go on the heath, where there was a castle, which the key would fit, and that all which was therein should belong to him. Now, when the child was 7 years old, and had grown very big, he once went to play with some other boys, and each of them boasted that he had got more from his godfather than the other. But the child could say nothing, and was vexed, and went home and said to his father, "Did I get nothing at all from my godfather?" "Oh, yes," said the father, "thou hadst a key. If there is a castle standing on the heath, just go to it and open it." Then the boy went thither, but no castle was to be seen or to be heard of. After 7 years more, when he was 14 years old, he again went thither, and there stood a castle. When he had opened it, there was nothing within but a horse, a white one. When the boy was still full of joy because he had a horse, that he mounted on it and galloped back to his father. "Now I have a white horse, and I will travel," said he. So he set out, and as he was on his way, a pen was lying on the road. At first he thought he would pick it up, but then again he thought to himself, "Thou shouldst leave it lying there. Thou wilt easily find a pen where thou art going, if thou hast need of one." And as he was thus riding away, a voice called after him, "Ferdinand the Faithful, take it with thee." He looked around, but he saw no one. Then he went back again and picked it up. When he had ridden a little further away, he passed by a lake, and a fish was lying on the bank, gasping and panting for breath. So he said, "Wait, my dear fish, I will help thee get into the water." And he took hold of it by the tail, and threw it into the lake. Then the fish put its head out of the water and said, "As thou hast helped me out of the mud, I will give thee a flute." When thou art in any need, play on it, and then I will help thee. And if ever thou lettest anything fall in the water, just play, and I will reach it out for thee." Then he rode away. And there came to him a man, who asked him where he was going. "Oh, to the next place." Then the man asked what his name was. "Ferdinand the Faithful." "So, then we have almost the same name, for I am called Ferdinand the Unfaithful." And they both set out to the inn in the nearest place. Now, it was fortunate that Ferdinand the Unfaithful knew everything that the other had ever thought, and everything he was about to do. He knew it by means of all kinds of wicked arts. There was, however, in the inn, an honest girl, who had a bright face and behaved very prettily. She fell in love with Ferdinand the Faithful, because he was a handsome man, and she asked him whither he was going. "Oh, I am just travelling about," said he. Then she said he ought to stay here, for the king of that country wanted an attendant or an outrider, and he ought to enter his service. He answered he could not very well go to anyone like that and offer himself. Then said the maiden, "Oh, but I will soon do that for thee." And she went straight to the king, and told him that she knew of an excellent servant for him. He was well pleased with that, and had Ferdinand the Faithful brought to him, and wanted to make him his servant. He, however, liked better to be an outrider, for where his horse was, there he also wanted to be. So the king made him an outrider. When Ferdinand the Unfaithful learnt that, he said to the girl, "What? Dost thou help him and not me?" "Oh, I will help thee too," said the girl. She thought, "I must keep friends with that man, for he is not to be trusted." She went to the king and offered him as a servant, and the king was willing. Now, when the king met his lords in the morning, he always lamented and said, "Oh, if I had but my love with me." Ferdinand the Faithful was, however, always hostile to Ferdinand the Faithful. So once, when the king was complaining thus, he said, "Thou hast the outrider, send him away to get her, and if he does not do it, his head must be struck off." And the king sent for Ferdinand the Faithful, and told him that there was, in this place or in that place, a girl he loved, and that he was to bring her to him, and if he did not do it, he should die. Ferdinand the Faithful went into the stable to his white horse, and complained and lamented, "Oh, what an unhappy man I am!" Then someone behind him cried, "Ferdinand the Faithful, why weepest thou?" He looked round, but saw no one, and went on lamenting, "Oh, my dear little white horse, now must I leave thee, now must I die." Then someone cried once more, "Ferdinand the Faithful, why weepest thou?" Then, for the first time, he was aware that it was his little white horse who was putting that question. "Dost thou speak, my little white horse? Canst thou do that?" And again he said, "I am to go to this place and to do that, and I am to bring the bride. Canst thou tell me how I am to set about it?" Then answered the little white horse, "Go thou to the king, and say if he will give thee what thou must have, thou wilt get her for him. If he will give thee a ship full of meat, and a ship full of bread, it will succeed. Great giants dwell on the lake, and if thou takest no meat with thee for them, they will tear thee to pieces. And there are the large birds, which would pick the eyes out of thy head if thou hadst no bread for them." Then the king made all the butchers in the land kill, and all the bakers bake, that the ships might be filled. When they were full, the little white horse said to Ferdinand the Faithful, "Now mount me, and go with me into the ship, and then when the giants come, say, 'Peace, peace, my dear little giants. I had thought of thee, something I have brought for thee. When the birds come, thou shalt say again, Peace, peace, my dear little birds. I have thought of thee, something I have brought for ye. They will do nothing to thee, and when thou comest to the castle, the giants will help thee. Then go up to the castle, and take a couple of giants with thee. There the princess lies sleeping. Thou must, however, not awaken her, for the giants must lift her up and carry her in her bed to the ship. And now everything took place as the little white horse had said. And Ferdinand the Faithful gave the giants and the birds what he had brought with him for them, and that made the giants willing. And they carried the princess in her bed to the king, and when she came to the king, she said that she could not live. She must have her writings which had been left in the castle. Then, by the instigation of Ferdinand the Unfaithful, Ferdinand the Faithful was called, and the king told him he must fetch the writings from the castle, or he should die. Then he went once more into the stables, and bemoaned himself and said, Oh, my dear white horse, now I am to go away again. How am I able to do it? Then the little white horse said, as he was to load the ships full again. So it happened again, as it had happened before, and the giants and the bird were satisfied, and made gentle by the meat. When they came to the castle, the white horse told Ferdinand the Faithful that he must go in, and that on the table in the princess's bedroom lay the writings. And Ferdinand the Faithful went in and fetched them. When they were on the lake, he let his pen fall into the water. Then said the white horse, Now I cannot help thee at all. But he remembered his flute, and began to play on it. And the fish came with the pen in its mouth, and gave it to him. So he took the writings to the castle, where the wedding was celebrated. The queen, however, did not love the king, because he had no nose. But she would have very much liked to love Ferdinand the Faithful. Once, therefore, when all the lords of the court were together, the queen said she could do feats of magic, that she could cut off anyone's head and put it on again, and that one of them ought just to try it. But none of them would be the first. So Ferdinand the Faithful, again at the instigation of Ferdinand the Unfaithful, undertook it, and she hewed off his head, and put it on him again, and it healed together directly, so that it looked as if he had had a red thread about his throat. Then the king said to her, My child, where hast thou learned that? Yes, she said, I understand the art. Shall I just try it on thee also? Oh, yes, said he. But she cut off his head, and did not put it on again, but pretended that she could not get it on, that it would not keep fixed. And the king was buried, but she married Ferdinand the Faithful. He, however, always rode on his white horse, and once, when he was seated on it, it told him that he was to go to the heath on which he knew, and gallop 3 times round it. And when he had done that, the white horse stood up on his hind legs, and was changed into a king's son. And that is the end of the story. That's an odd one. Let's see what the time. We've been streaming about 30 minutes, but 55 of that was... Okay. The next story is just about 3 pages, so we'll read the next one as well, and that will be the end. And then we must to bed. The next story is called Sweetheart Roland. There was once a woman who was a witch, and she had 2 daughters, one ugly and wicked, one pretty and good. She loved the wicked one, because she was her own child, but she hated the good one, because she was the stepdaughter. One day, the stepdaughter put on a pretty apron, which the other daughter liked so much that she had become envious, and said to her mother that she must and should have the apron. "Be content, my child," said the old woman. "Thou shalt have it. Thy stepsister has long deserved death, and tonight, while she is asleep, I shall come and cut off her head. Take care to lie at the farthest side of the bed, and push her to the outside." And it would have been all over for the poor girl if she had not been standing in the corner near and heard it all. She did not go outside the door the whole day long, and when bedtime came, the other one got into bed first, so as to lie on the farthest side. But when she had gone to sleep, the stepdaughter pushed her towards the outside, and took the place next to the wall. In the night, the old woman came sneaking. In her right hand she held an axe. In her left she felt for the one who was lying outside. Then she heaved up the axe with both hands, and hewed the head off her only daughter. When she had gone away, the other girl got up, and went to her sweetheart, who was called Roland, and knocked at his door. When he came to her, she said, "Listen, dear Roland, we must flee away in all haste. My stepmother meant to put me to death, but she had killed her only child instead. When day breaks and she sees what she has done, we are lost." "But I advise you," said Roland, "to bring away her magic wand with you. Otherwise we cannot escape her when she comes to overtake us." So the maiden fetched the magic wand, and she took it up the head of her stepsister and let it drop 3 drops of blood on the ground, one by the bed, one in the kitchen, and one on the steps. Then she hastened back to her sweetheart. When the old witch got up in the morning, she called out to her daughter to give her the apron, but no daughter came. Then she cried out, "Where art thou?" "Here at the steps sweeping." "Here at the steps sweeping," answered one of the drops of blood. The old woman went out, but she saw nobody at the steps, and cried, "Where art thou?" "Here in the kitchen, warming myself," cried the second drop of blood. So she went to the kitchen and found no one. Then she cried out, "Where art thou?" "Oh, here in bed, fast asleep," cried the third drop of blood. Then the mother went into the room, and up to the bed, and there lay her only child, whose head she had cut off herself. The witch fell into a great fury, rushed to the window, for from it she could see far and wide, and she caught sight of her stepdaughter hastening away with her dear Roland. "It will be no good to you," cried she. "If you ever get so far away, you cannot escape me." Then she put on her boots, which took her an hour's walk at every stride, and it was not long before she had overtaken them. But the maiden, when she saw the old woman striding up, changed by means of the magic wand her dear Roland into a lake, and herself into a duck swimming upon it. The witch stood on the bank, and threw in crumbs of bread, and took great pains to decoy the duck towards her. But the duck would not be decoyed, and the old woman was obliged to go back in the evening disappointed. Then the maiden and her dear Roland took again their natural shapes, and travelled on the whole night through until daybreak. Then the maiden changed herself into a beautiful flower, standing in the middle of a hedge of thorns, and her dear Roland into a fiddle player. It was not long before the witch came striding by, and she said to the musician, "Dear musician, will you be so kind as to reach that pretty flower for me?" "Oh, yes," he said. I will strike up a tune to it." Then, as she crept quickly to the edge to break off the flower, for she knew well who it was, he began to play. And whether she liked it or not, she was obliged to dance, for there was a magic in the tune. The faster he played, the higher she had to jump, and the thorns tore her clothes and scratched and wounded her, and he did not cease playing until she was spent and lay dead. So now they were saved, and Roald said, "They will go to my father and prepare for the wedding. And I will stay here," said the maiden, "and wait for you. And so that no one should know me, I will change myself into a red milestone. So away went Roland, and the maiden, in the likeness of a stone, waited in the field for her beloved. But when Roland went home, he fell into the snares of another maiden, who wrought so that he forgot his first love. And the poor girl waited a long time. But at last, seeing that he did not come, she was filled with despair, and changed herself into a flower, thinking, "Perhaps someone passing will put his foot upon me and crush me." But it happened that a shepherd, tending his flock, saw the flower, and as it was so beautiful, he gathered it, took it home with him, and put it in his chest. From that time, everything went wonderfully well in the shepherd's house. When he got up in the morning, all the work was already done. The room was swept, the tables and benches rubbed, fire kindled on the hearth, and water ready drawn. And when he came home in the middle of the day, the table was laid, and a good meal spread upon it. He could not understand how it was done, for he never saw anybody in his house, and it was too little for anybody to hide in. The good serving pleased him well, but in the end he became uneasy, and he went to a wise woman to take counsel of her. The wise woman said, "There is a magic in it. Get up early some morning, and if you hear something moving in the kitchen, be it what it may, throw a white cloth over it, and the charm will be broken." The shepherd did as she told him. The next morning at daybreak he saw the chest open, and the flower came out. Then he jumped up quickly, and threw a white cloth over it, so the spell was broken, and a lovely maiden stood before him. And she told him that she had been the flower, and had, until now, cared for his household matters. She told him all that had happened to her, and she pleased him so much that he asked her to marry him. But she answered, "No," because she still remained true to her dear Roland, though he had forsaken her, but he had promised not to leave the shepherd, but to go on taking care of his house. Now the time came when Roland's wedding was to be held. There was an old custom in that country, that all the girls should be present, and should sing in honor of the bride and bridegroom. The faithful maiden, when she knew this, was so sorrowful that she felt as if her heart would break. And she would not go, until the others came and fetched her. And when her turn came to sing, she slipped behind so that she stood alone, and so began to sing. And as soon as her song reached Roland's ears, he sprang up and cried, "I know that voice! That is the right bride, and no other I will have." And everything that he had forgotten, and that had been swept out of his mind, came suddenly home to him in his heart. And the faithful maiden was married to her dear Roland. Her sorrow came to an end, and her joy began. And that is the end of that story. And with that, that is the last story that we will be reading this week. Next week, it looks like we'll be reading The Worn-Out Dancing Shoes, and perhaps also The Almond Tree. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Our schedule for this coming week has been posted on Twitter. But also, I have an additional announcement that I only found out about after posting that schedule. Our next stream will be Sunday night for the D&D stream. The Vault of King Midas campaign will continue with Session 2. After that, on Monday, I will be doing another gaming stream. I hope to complete another Metroid 2 remake. Tuesday, there will be a gaming stream. If I did not finish AM2R, it will be continuing that. Otherwise, a new game, possibly Super Metroid. We will see. I might take a break before doing Super Metroid. And I have a special stream planned for Wednesday. Wednesday will be a collab stream with Vivian-Vtuber. And we will be playing Portal 2 again. Please follow us on Twitter for all updates and to be notified before we go live for any of these events. Thank you again for listening. This has come to the end. Have a good night and pleasant dreams.